Welcome boys and girls, Christine here with a discussion about Khorne in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. And this might just be one of the most amazing races to play in Warhammer 3 at the moment. And certainly a race that is both very thematic to what Khorne should be, and a race that works very well within the context of the meta of Warhammer 3, which is certainly focused on the early game more so than the late game. Though Khorne is also fairly good in the late game as well, but given the focus of Warhammer 3 campaigns on the early game due to the way the game is designed, it is important to have that kind of good early game, and Khorne absolutely does have that. Originally, when Warhammer 3 was released, Khorne was certainly a race that could achieve a great deal very quickly in a campaign, though it wasn't really a great design. Resource buildings weren't particularly great. Your army variety wasn't fantastic because while you technically had a bunch of really good units available with Khorne and more were added with Champions of Chaos, in reality you would just end up playing a campaign as Khorne with a bunch of Chaos Warriors of Khorne, maybe some Marauders of Khorne, Marauder Horsemen. You'd use Blood Hosts as Scarbrand and use an exploit in a way, if you want to consider it an exploit, where you would attack a settlement, raise it, and you would, if you position Scarbrand in such a way, you could move from one settlement to another in the same turn, or infinite movement within the same turn. Though that was because when you raise a settlement, your character would just move a very large distance. Creative Assembly has fixed that, though you still gain quite a bit of movement when you're raising settlements to the ground. And previously, it only really worked with Scarbrand, but now every single lord that you have in any Khorne campaign does have an inherent benefit to getting a good amount of campaign movement range after winning a battle, raising a settlement. So they've toned down the bullshit that Scarbrand was only available to Scarbrand, but they've overall made the race substantially better in more ways than one. For starters, in terms of campaign mobility, while you may not have the same kind of movement range from raising settlements, you do have a lot of movement range through cults. The Monogods do have cultists that can allow teleportation of the Legendary Lord, but Khorne has access to these cultists very easily and can get more of these faster than the other Monogods. Partly because of the growth that Khorne gets, partly because of our research called War Leaders that gives you a hero capacity cultist, the fact that cultist capacity increases at tier 3. Though that's not necessarily unique to Khorne. But what is more unique is just a combination of growth, so commandments, buildings, and just the tier requirements that allow you to have a good amount of flexibility on the campaign map. So for instance, over here I have Scarbrand. In this location, next turn, I'll just build a cult right here in Morkheim, teleport there. I already teleported Scarbrand from right about here to Khemri, wiped out Khemri. Now I'm at war with Manfred, because, of course, I'm at war with Manfred. And so I teleported here, and next turn I'm going to teleport again. And what's great about this is you can have a cultist set up a cult. Then you have another cultist in your Legendary Lord army, who can then set up another cult. And you can just have this kind of ping-pong playstyle in a campaign, which gives you a lot of mobility, not just allowing you to conquer a vast amounts of territory very quickly, but also just dealing with various situations. Another thing to be said about Khorne is the diplomatic capability that you do have as Khorne. See, you have the ability of vassalizing factions through diplomacy. It's a bit hilarious, I gotta say, that Scarbrand is actually the master diplomat in a lot of ways in a campaign, more so than someone like Karl Franz. It is hilarious, but it also does end up working very, very well. So you end up with a good amount of vassals, you end up with a good amount of diplomatic flexibility, campaign map flexibility. You may not have the best climate viability of any campaign in the game, in any of the Khorne campaigns, but it kind of doesn't matter really, because Khorne doesn't necessarily care about holding a lot of territory either, and I think that is one unique aspect that should be praised with regards to Khorne. How do you make a campaign interesting while holding a limited amount of territory, but still forcing the player to go out there and engage in the world. Because you could have a turtle playstyle like, say, the Wood Elves, but that ends up, just then turn-based simulator. With Khorne, you want to go out there and do stuff. You want to seek battles. You're going to become better for it. You inherently cannot take the same amount of territory as certain other factions in a campaign, but you kind of don't really care about it in the same way that other factions do care about it. You can't take as many settlements because every settlement costs 2,500 skulls to actually acquire. You gain skulls for battles, you gain skulls for raising settlements, but you're never going to just be able to conquer everything that you want. Nor should you really do so, because Khorne can raise settlements to the ground, and then through Khorne corruption, you have a chance of gaining control of automatically colonizing these ruins. This system is better than where it was at the beginning of Warhammer 3, as with many other things in after Omens of Destruction. This system is better because now you have a couple of turns where an AI faction can't colonize it. That was previously not necessarily the case. So you could raise a bunch of settlements with the idea that, oh, I'm just going to colonize them automatically after a point, assuming I only got one settlement in province, but then the AI would beat you to it. But now, because of this limited debuff, you end up in a situation where this is far, far more workable. It increases with cast corruption, it increases for research, with things like spread rage. It increases through the Skull Throne. The improvements to the Skull Throne are also very significant as well. You have a system where you use skulls, and you can gain some really, really solid advantages over here, like Summon from Beyond, instantly replenishing the faction leader's army or their movement range, summoning a blood host, all these kind of things. Compared to what we had before is a better system. We have Unholy Manifestations. Those work largely as they did before, a couple of minor changes, but still a really good system over here with Unholy Manifestation, especially when you consider the Great Game and you get Khorne Ascendant, and those work on their own separate cooldown as opposed to the regular ones. So you end up having a ton of choice, consequences for those choices, campaign flexibility. If there is any kind of downside, is you're kind of going to want to focus on certain things versus others early on in a campaign, like taking control of your original province because it's better for it, focusing on getting higher tier settlements to get access to a really sweet unit variety, but it ends up working exceptionally well in a campaign. Even with that kind of focus, like this kind of army variety of getting cast warriors with dual weapons, cast knights, and this is just really the start. Like, it's still turn 20. Soon enough, I'll be able to get the settlement to tier 4, and I'll then be able to get cast knights with lances. I'll be able to get a bunch of other things as well. I mean, heck, I already can get Wrathmongers, and I already can get Chosen. In this campaign, maybe I should just get Chosen and start getting Chosen. What's also great about this, with a campaign that's all about traveling the world, you do have the ability of increasing, of really making global recruitment work very, very quick. Arbol is the best in this respect, but it's not necessarily too bad for other campaigns. Certainly with units that inherently require 2 turns to global recruit, it is going to be a problem, like Cast Knights. Arbol just flat out does it best because he has that inherent benefit for his own army of global recruiting units faster. But yeah, with Bloodletting and with the Skull Throne, with this specific benefit from the Skull Throne, you can manage it with other armies as well, to a degree. Though you're going to have to work for it to unlock it, get a good amount of Bloodletting to really get that kind of power. So that is just, simply put, a really fantastic system of design. Like, you have really fun armies, really good melee capability with your units. Your lords are pretty strong. They get that kind of campaign movement replenishment inherently through the Blood God's Vigor. It just flat out works in a way that it really didn't beforehand. You can burn everything to the ground if you want to. You can also build a massive empire with vassals and allies in a campaign by taking territory. Sure, you will have to spend a skull on it, by taking territory then selling that territory to other factions. So for instance, over here, you know, I could get the vassalization with Gorbad Ironclaw. I could get the vassalization with Queek. Hell, I could even vassalize Manfred if he was willing to play ball, and apparently he's not in this specific situation. But I can work with that. There are ways of me making that situation work. You're also pretty decent in terms of auto-resolve. So, let me just skip a turn ahead after Scarbrand has teleported and just go over some of the things that don't necessarily work, and just a bit more on, like, you know, mobility and campaign flexibility. So, a couple of turns later, having used the cult, I took Markheim, sold that to Gorbad, got him as a vassal, got Queek as a vassal, and now let the real fun begin. And that's not really the end of all of it, though, because there are many more factions that where you can use this kind of playstyle. Like, I could go with Greases, I could go with Scrag. It just depends on how far am I willing to take this roller coaster, really. Because there are so many juicy possibilities that are available in a campaign like this, and so many varieties of armies that you can put together. But that kind of flexibility on a campaign map is freaking fantastic. Now, if there is a downside, and it is a fairly substantial downside, is the mortal demonic settlement split. So what Creative Assembly decided to do for Khorne in this patch is create the difference between mortal and demonic settlements. So mortal settlements can only recruit mortal units, demonic settlements can only recruit demon units. The exception is the Domain of Slaughter building chain, though that's a bit pointless to even consider, because there is a resource that Khorne has, and you gotta appreciate the effort they put in remaking resources, but there is a resource node called Test Enclave and Animals that allows you to get Minotaurs, Slaughter Brood, Spawn of Khorne, Bloodletters, Forsaken, Blood Beasts of Khorne. So basically all the units that you get from that building chain are available from that kind of resource. So it is fantastic to get it, but yeah, it just makes... It would be pointless to put this building with anything in particular. What that means realistically, though, is if you want things like Bloodthirsters, Soul Grinders, or crucially Skull Cannons, which are really good artillery units, hell, even, you know, Blood Shrines, amazing chariot units, one of the best chariot units in the game, like, because they're single entities, so they may not necessarily do as much damage as some other chariot units, but they can go in battle, do a bunch of damage, get out of battle. They don't have the same kind of pathfinding issues. But if you want to get Skull Cannons, you are going to have to get the Demonic Settlement. The problem is that Mortal Settlements just offer you more. 2 heroes as opposed to 1, Chosen, Skull Reapers, Wrathmongers. Like, Wrathmongers, I think, are the best infantry unit in the game right now. I know people in the multiplayer community have complained about how ridiculous they are. But yeah, you do have a good amount of inherent spell resistance, a good amount of durability to your units. You have a really fun roster to use. It is just that limitation, especially early on. So there are some things I think Creative Assembly missed the mark on with respect to Khorne. In particular, like, yeah, locking Skull Cannons as your only artillery unit at tier 4 for a demonic settlement only is not necessarily the most fun situation to tackle in a campaign, but you can make it work, and, you know, in 30 turns or so, probably I will be at tier 4 there, and I should be able to get my hands on a Skull Cannon. Maybe 40, something like that, 40 plus turns. So eventually you do get it, and you can recruit whatever you want after one point. It is just that early game annoyance over there a bit. But to be clear, it's just annoying when so many other things for Khorne are so readily available that those few situations where you don't have something available are frustrating, but it's still a much better situation than other races, than the vast majority of other races, because the vast majority of other races may have cool units, but you will not be able to access them. You will not be able to use them in a regular campaign, at least when it matters. I can even give examples of really good races that have this problem. So take into consideration the dwarves, right? If, like, over here, turn 25, 4 Grimm's AI on Legendary is getting a tier 4 character, correct. But you need tier 5 for a Thunder Barge, and getting tier 4 is one thing. Getting tier 5 is a completely different beast. And even if you get there, you may not necessarily have the same incentives, because, you know, the structures, etc., economic cost. Whereas Khorne has such a significant upkeep benefit to every single one of your armies. Like, you don't have an economy as Khorne. You're not really generating a lot of money, but the sheer quality of units that you're maintaining is ridiculous. Like, this is a much better army than most other factions have. Sure, you run into the issue of maybe, you know, fighting outnumbered with certain forces, but there are thankfully solutions to that problem. It's called Lightning Strike. It's a really wonderful ability to have over there. So there are things you can do, even though you might be fighting outnumbered. And to be certain, it takes an insanely powerful army to overcome something like this in a campaign, let alone the higher tiers bullshit that Khorne can and will access in a campaign. Like, you know, once you start getting Bloodthirsters, Soul Grinders, chosen with dual weapons and Wrathmongers, it's GG, well played, they I can do squat. But it's fun that you can at least use these units, have them available, and it makes sense to recruit them outside of just like, oh, I want fluff. No. In a Khorne campaign, you may want that extra combat power to begin with. You don't have supply lines to deal with, though. So that is a benefit, but you may want that kind of combat power. A lot of people do hate you, and you are looking to just dive into those kind of challenges. Like, this is the thing. With Arbolt and Skulltaker especially, but also Scarbrand, you are seeking those worthy foes. You are seeking that challenge. You are throwing yourself, because you get more post-battle, you get more experience, you get more skulls. You really get more skulls to make it work. So that's the reason why you go out of your way for these kind of things, and why you need an army that's generally stronger than what other factions would have. Like, the difference in playstyle between Khorne and other factions. In other factions, if you're playing other factions in the game, you might just want to manipulate the AI so that the strongest armies are getting ambushed, or they're, you know, vastly outnumbered, then you obliterate them. With Khorne, you're just diving headfirst into a challenge, and it is very thematic. It's very appropriate, blood for the blood god, and all that kind of stuff. So there's absolutely things that hopefully Creative Assembly will not forget these lessons. Now, this brings up a point, that there are certainly some racial designs or faction designs, like you look at Snitch. Snitch has an amazing faction design. But there are things that they should have carried over in Warhammer 3 from Warhammer 2, and they didn't. So hopefully the things that they're doing right now, like Ogres, Khorne, Kislev, Dwarves, they don't forget about those in the next game, or the people designing the next game pay attention to what's going on over here, because this is really good. Costin, signing out.